Get out. Now. Those were the first words I heard after 22 hours of travel, 3 airport delays, and a taxi ride home in the rain. I was still holding my suitcase when I realized my key didn't fit. At first, I thought I was just exhausted. The porch light flickered the way it always did, moths throwing themselves against the glass. The jasmine bush I planted last spring brushed my arm as I tried again. Wrong angle, I told myself. Wrong pressure. I tried a third time. The key slid in halfway and stopped. That's when the front door opened from the inside. Daniel stood there, barefoot, wearing the navy lounge trousers I bought him for his birthday. Calm. Almost bored. His hair was neatly combed like he'd been expecting someone important. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared. You changed the locks, I said quietly. Yes, he replied, as if confirming the weather. You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be here. In front of my own house. The house I wired the deposit for. The house my name appeared first on in the mortgage agreement. The house whose paint color I chose, an indecisive shade called winter linen, that Daniel had complained about for weeks. I felt the rain soak through my blazer. A neighbor's curtain twitched 2 houses down. Mrs. Khalid never missed anything. Daniel, I said carefully, open the door. He didn't move. Instead, he stepped outside, closing it behind him. And that was when I saw her. Through the hallway mirror. A woman standing near our staircase. Long dark hair. My throw blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I didn't recognize her. You've been away for 3 months, Daniel said, folding his arms. You said you needed space. I decided I needed clarity. Clarity. I was in Manchester on a contract, I said. We agreed on that. We agreed you'd prioritize this marriage, he corrected. You chose work. The taxi driver was still at the end of the drive, engine idling, watching us through the rearview mirror. My humiliation was now a live broadcast. I live here, I said. My voice didn't shake. I made sure of that. You can't legally. Legally? He actually laughed. Soft. Condescending. Amira, don't make this ugly. Ugly. Like I had brought something distasteful to his doorstep. I changed the locks last week, he continued. I've already spoken to someone about next steps. Next steps, I repeated. He nodded. You can collect your things later. I'll arrange a time. Arrange a time. For me to enter my own home. The rain was heavier now. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, probably my sister asking if I'd landed safely. I stared at Daniel. He looked confident. Certain. As if this scene had played out in his mind many times and ended exactly this way, me stunned, embarrassed, defeated. The woman inside shifted. I saw her reflection step closer to the hallway table. My hallway table. I noticed small details then. The new security camera above the porch. The unfamiliar SUV parked in the drive. Boxes near the shoe rack. He hadn't acted impulsively. He had planned this. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Daniel shrugged. You're resourceful. I almost smiled at that. Resourceful. That word again. He used to say it admiringly when I negotiated contracts. When I restructured debt. When I solved problems he couldn't. Now it sounded like an accusation. The taximeter ticked louder in the silence. Mrs. Khalid's curtain shifted again. Public. He wanted this public. I'll send you an email, Daniel said. About arrangements. Then he opened the door just enough to slip back inside. Before closing it, he looked at me one last time. No anger. No guilt. Just certainty. The lock clicked. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, rain soaking my hair, suitcase upright beside me like a silent witness. Then I turned. The taxi driver avoided my eyes as he loaded my case back into the boot. Hotel, he asked gently. Yes, I replied. But as the car pulled away from the house, my house, I looked back at the porch light glowing against the dark. Daniel thought this was control. He thought changing a lock changed ownership. He thought silence meant weakness. He didn't know what I had spent the last 3 months building. And he definitely didn't realize whose name was on more than just the mortgage. The first time Daniel laughed at me in public, we had been married 11 months. It was a dinner at his firm, low lighting, expensive wine, polished wood tables that reflected everyone's carefully curated confidence. I was explaining a restructuring model I'd built for a manufacturing client. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers. Projections. Risk mitigation. Daniel placed his hand lightly on my wrist and smiled at the table. She gets very intense about spreadsheets, he said. They laughed. I laughed too. Because that's what you do when your husband turns you into a punchline and you're still trying to be chosen. Back then, I told myself it was harmless. Banter. Adjustment. Marriage is compromise, I'd read somewhere. But the pattern didn't start there. It started years earlier, the night we signed the contract for the house. The solicitor had slid the documents across the table and asked, "Joint tenants?" Daniel hesitated. "Of course," I said calmly, before he could answer. "Joint tenants." He smiled tightly. "We're a team." We were a team in theory. In practice, I handled the deposit. £87,000 wired from my savings, bonuses from 5 years of overperforming in corporate finance, while Daniel climbed slowly through mid-level management. He used to call me relentless. At first, it sounded like admiration. Later, it sounded like resentment. When I received the Manchester contract, it wasn't just a promotion. It was a structural pivot for my firm. A 3-month on-site consultancy with an option to expand nationally. The fee was 6 figures. Daniel didn't congratulate me. He asked, "Do you really need more?" Need. As if ambition were greed. As if my growth threatened him. The argument that night was quiet, but sharp. "You're never here," he said. "I'm building our future," I replied. "Our future or yours?" That question stayed with me. I noticed small things after that. He stopped asking about my projects. He began making financial decisions without discussing them, smaller ones at first. A car lease upgrade. A new investment account, to try something different. One evening, while reviewing our joint statements, I saw a transfer I didn't recognize. £15,000 moved into an account I didn't have access to. When I asked, he shrugged. "Just diversifying." "Under whose name?" I asked. He kissed my forehead instead of answering. That was when I began doing what I do best. Observing. Not confronting. Not accusing. Just documenting. I've never believed in emotional reactions without data. During my Manchester stay, while Daniel complained about distance and drifting, I was working 16-hour days. But I was also reviewing everything. Access logs. Property documents. Mortgage amendments. There had been an application submitted 6 weeks before I returned. An attempt to refinance. Sole name. Rejected, of course. Because legally, he couldn't proceed without my consent. He didn't know I received automatic alerts. He also didn't know that before leaving for Manchester, I had met privately with a property lawyer. Just in case. Not because I suspected infidelity. Because I sensed insecurity. And insecure men, when cornered by their own inadequacy, don't attack loudly. They maneuver quietly. The woman in the hallway mirror wasn't the beginning. She was the symptom. 3 weeks into my Manchester contract, Daniel had asked oddly specific questions. "How long exactly are you locked into this project? Can you extend it? What happens if you resign?" At the time, I thought it was loneliness speaking. Now, replaying those conversations in the taxi that rainy night, I heard strategy. He needed me away. Long enough to reposition himself. To create a narrative. Wife prioritizes career. Marriage suffers. Husband forced to make hard choices. Victimhood suits men like Daniel. It disguises ambition as injury. But here's what Daniel misunderstood. While he was reframing our story socially, I was restructuring our reality legally. 2 months before I left for Manchester, I moved 60% of my personal assets into a protected trust structure, standard wealth planning. Sensible. Boring. Responsible. I also updated beneficiary designations. Quietly. I didn't do it out of paranoia. I did it because my father once told me, after losing everything in a failed partnership, always prepare for the moment someone underestimates you. Daniel underestimated me gradually. First emotionally. Then financially. Then legally. Changing the locks was dramatic. But it wasn't strategic. And Daniel has always confused boldness with power. As the taxi carried me toward the hotel that night, my phone buzzed again. An email. From Daniel. Subject line, "Next steps." I didn't open it. Not yet. Because I already knew something he didn't. The locks weren't the only thing that had been changed. I waited 48 hours before replying to Daniel's email. Silence unsettles confident men more than confrontation ever will. His message was exactly what I expected, measured, polite, almost rehearsed. Amira, given the strain on our marriage and your extended absence, I think it's best we separate formally. I've consulted a solicitor. We can arrange a time for you to collect personal belongings. I'll ensure this remains respectful. Respectful. The word lingered. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my lawyer. At 9:12 the next morning, I received confirmation. A meeting had been scheduled. Neutral location. Daniel, his solicitor, my solicitor, and me. Boardroom setting. How appropriate. Before that meeting, though, there was something else. Daniel's firm was hosting its annual winter reception that Friday evening. Spouses and partners invited. Industry guests attending. It was the kind of event where reputations crystallized over champagne flutes. I had declined weeks earlier due to travel fatigue. On Wednesday afternoon, Daniel sent another email. For clarity, I'll inform colleagues of our separation at the reception. It's better they hear it from me. From him. Narrative control. I smiled when I read that. Because Daniel has always believed timing equals dominance. He didn't know timing is only powerful if you hold the full file. That same afternoon, I logged into our shared cloud drive, the one he assumed I never checked anymore. Folders had been renamed. Statements reorganized. A new folder titled Personal. Inside it were scanned copies of mortgage documents. Highlighted sections. Annotations. He had been preparing to present something. Perhaps proof that he had contributed equally. Perhaps evidence that I had been absent. He underestimated two things. I archive everything. I never delete metadata. Timestamps don't lie. Nor do IP addresses. The refinance application he submitted? Filed from our home office computer at 2:17 a.m. 3 weeks before I left for Manchester. The transfer of £15,000? Moved into an account under a holding company registered in his cousin's name. Amateur. But ambition makes people sloppy. On Thursday evening, I requested an invitation to the reception. Not through Daniel. Through the firm's event coordinator. I'll be attending after all, I wrote. Looking forward to reconnecting. She replied within minutes, warm and welcoming. Daniel texted at 21:04. I thought you were resting. I didn't respond. Instead, I reviewed one final document. The property deed. Joint tenants. Clause 14, disposition restrictions without mutual consent. He couldn't sell. He couldn't refinance. And most importantly, he couldn't evict. Changing locks without court order? Illegal exclusion. I didn't need to threaten him with it. I just needed him to realize it in front of the right audience. Friday evening arrived cold and bright. Frost edged the pavements. I chose a charcoal silk dress, structured, minimal, unshakable. When I entered the reception hall, conversations softened by a fraction. Daniel was near the bar, laughing with two senior partners. He saw me. The smile didn't disappear immediately. That's what made it interesting. It flickered. Just slightly. He hadn't expected me to show up. The woman from the hallway mirror stood beside him. Red dress this time. Confident posture. He placed his hand lightly at her back when I approached. A territorial gesture. Predictable. Amira, he said smoothly. I didn't think. I changed my mind, I replied. His colleagues looked between us. Tension, subtle but alive. I was just explaining the situation, Daniel continued, projecting calm. We've decided to separate amicably. Amicably. I noticed how he positioned himself half a step ahead of her. Presenter. Narrator. I see, I said. The senior partner, Mr. Ellison, cleared his throat politely. I'm sorry to hear that. Daniel nodded solemnly. Distance changes priorities. Distance. Interesting choice. I held his gaze for a moment longer than comfort allowed. Then I said, gently, yes. It does. The room felt smaller. Conversations nearby slowed. Daniel's confidence grew as silence stretched. He mistook it for surrender. Amira has always been driven, he added. Sometimes relationships require compromise. There it was again. The framing. The subtle indictment. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I agree, I said calmly. Compromise requires transparency. His jaw tightened just slightly. Not enough for most to notice. But I did. Perhaps, I continued, we should clarify everything properly. Especially before any formal announcements are made. He smiled. Controlled. Dismissive. Of course. He thought this was a discussion. He didn't realize it was an unveiling. And he certainly didn't realize that in exactly 7 minutes, a scheduled email would land in more inboxes than his own. At 1942, the first notification sounded. Not loud. Just a polite vibration against crystal and glass. Daniel didn't notice it. He was mid-sentence, explaining something about mutual decisions and different life directions. The woman in red, Lena, I had learned from a whisper near the coat check, stood composed beside him, fingers looped lightly around his arm. Another phone buzzed. Then another. Mr. Ellison glanced down at his screen. His expression changed first. Confusion. Then recognition. Daniel, he said slowly, is this accurate? Daniel frowned. Is what accurate? More phones lit up. A ripple traveled through the room, not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet recalibration. The way markets shift before the news reaches television. I didn't move. Silence is more unsettling when the subject of it doesn't flinch. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket. Unlocked it. Read. And for the first time that evening, his confidence hesitated. The scheduled email had gone out precisely as arranged. Not to gossip blogs. Not to friends. To the senior partners of his firm. To the compliance department. To his solicitor. And to him. Subject line, clarification regarding joint property and legal standing. Professional. Neutral. Documented. Attached were 3 things. The joint tenancy deed highlighting Clause 14, no unilateral changes permitted. Confirmation of attempted refinance application submitted without spousal consent. A formal notice drafted by my lawyer regarding a legal lock change and unlawful exclusion. No accusations. No emotional language. Just facts. Timestamps. Legal references. Daniel swallowed. This is unnecessary, he said, forcing a small laugh. Amira tends to overdocument things. Overdocument. Mr. Ellison didn't laugh. You attempted to refinance the marital home solely? He asked. Daniel shifted his weight. It was exploratory. At 2:17 in the morning, another partner added quietly, reading from his screen. Lena's hand slipped from Daniel's arm. The room hadn't grown louder. It had grown sharper. I finally spoke. Daniel informed me I shouldn't be at my own house, I said evenly. After changing the locks while I was away on a contracted assignment. I let that sit. No raised voice. No trembling. Just clarity. Daniel's jaw tightened. You were absent for 3 months. For work, I replied. A contract you were fully aware of. He looked at the crowd, searching for reinforcement. What he found instead were professionals recalculating risk. Because here's what Daniel never considered. In corporate environments, personal judgment reflects professional judgment. If you mishandle your own legal obligations recklessly, what might you do with the clients? I think, I continued calmly, it's important no misrepresentation circulates regarding abandonment or consent. Especially not before legal proceedings are formally initiated. Abandonment. The word landed deliberately. Daniel's solicitor, who had been near the back of the room, stepped forward. Perhaps this conversation should happen privately. It already did, I replied softly. In email form. A few quiet murmurs followed. Daniel's face had shifted now, not red with anger, not pale with shame. Calculating. He moved closer to me, lowering his voice. You're making this hostile. No, I said. I'm making it accurate. Accuracy is uncomfortable when you've been relying on assumption. Mr. Ellison cleared his throat again. Daniel, we'll need to discuss this. Separately. Separately. Interesting word choice. Lena stepped back fully now. Distance, physical and social, established in one subtle movement. Daniel looked at her. She didn't meet his eyes. Because confidence is attractive until it looks reckless. I picked up my coat. I'm not here to escalate, I said to the room. Only to ensure transparency. The property remains jointly owned. Legal process will proceed appropriately. I turned to Daniel then. Close enough that only he could hear the final sentence. You changed a lock, I said quietly. I changed the leverage. For a second, just one, he saw it. The miscalculation. The assumption that absence meant vulnerability. The belief that narrative control equals authority. Around us, conversations resumed, but differently. Measured. Cautious. Daniel's phone buzzed again. Compliance department, most likely. When I walked toward the exit, no one stopped me. No one pitted me. They stepped aside. And as the cold air hit my face outside the reception hall, I realized something simple. Daniel hadn't planned for exposure. He had planned for surrender. The fallout began quietly. No shouting. No dramatic resignations. Just distance. On Monday morning, Daniel's firm placed him on temporary leave pending internal review. The phrasing was careful. Corporate language always is. It avoids blame while implying concern. He texted me at 8:03. This didn't need to go this far. I didn't reply. At 11:17, he called. I let it ring. By 14:40, he sent a longer message. They're treating me like I committed fraud. You've embarrassed me professionally. Was that your goal? Goal. Daniel still believed this was strategy born of spite. It wasn't. It was correction. That afternoon, my solicitor filed the formal notice regarding unlawful exclusion from the marital home. Clear timeline. Photographic evidence of lock change. Witness statement from the taxi driver who had agreed to confirm what he saw. The law doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to documentation. 2 days later, Daniel emailed asking to resolve matters privately. His tone had changed. Less declarative. More careful. We can avoid court involvement if you're willing to discuss equitable terms. Equitable. The word sounded new in his vocabulary. I agreed to a meeting. Neutral office. Frosted glass conference room. 10 a.m. sharp. He arrived early. I could tell because when I walked in at 9:58, he was already seated, fingers interlocked on the table, suit immaculate but eyes tired. Lena was not there. His solicitor was. Mine sat beside me. There was no hostility in the room. Just gravity. Daniel spoke first. I've been advised, he began, that the lock change may have been premature. Premature. That's one way to describe it, my solicitor said evenly. Daniel avoided my eyes. I reacted emotionally, he continued. The distance, the rumors. What rumors? I asked calmly. He hesitated. That you were planning to relocate permanently. That you'd already separated in practice. Interesting. Who started those? I asked. Silence. The kind that reveals more than confession. He shifted in his chair. I felt replaced, he admitted finally. You were building something bigger than us. There it was. Not betrayal. Not abandonment. Insecurity. He had mistaken my growth for erasure. I never asked you to shrink, I said quietly. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time in months, I saw something other than calculation. Regret. But regret doesn't reverse action. My solicitor outlined the legal position clearly. Joint ownership remains intact. Illegal exclusion strengthens my claim. Attempted refinance without consent reflects poor judgment. Financial transfers require full disclosure. Daniel listened without interruption. When numbers were discussed, equity splits, asset disclosures, timelines, he didn't argue. He asked for time. Time, I repeated softly. He nodded. To correct this. Correction. Not reconciliation. I appreciated that distinction. Outside the office building, snow had begun to fall, thin, deliberate flakes that softened sharp edges without erasing them. Daniel followed me out. Amira, he said, voice lower now. I didn't expect you to fight like this. I paused. I didn't fight, I replied. I clarified. He exhaled slowly. They're reviewing my partnership track, he admitted. This could delay everything. Delay. He still measured loss in professional increments. And the house? I asked. He swallowed. You can move back in immediately. I'll arrange alternative accommodation. Alternative accommodation. Interesting how quickly roles reverse when legality intervenes. I won't be moving back, I said. His head snapped slightly. Why? Because victory isn't reclaiming what someone tried to take. It's deciding you no longer need it. I've already secured a new property, I said calmly. Completion next month. He stared at me. You planned this. I prepared, I corrected. The snow settled lightly on his shoulders. I never thought you'd. He stopped. Leave? I offered. He nodded faintly. I almost smiled. He had believed control was architectural. Locks. Walls. Access. He never understood that leverage lives in preparation. You wanted clarity, I said. Now you have it. He looked smaller then, not physically, but structurally. As if the scaffolding of certainty had been removed. I didn't mean to humiliate you, he said quietly. You didn't, I replied. You exposed yourself. There's a difference. I stepped toward the pavement. Behind me, Daniel stood in the falling snow, finally understanding that dominance isn't loud. It's documented. Completion day felt strangely unceremonious. No champagne. No dramatic music swelling in the background. Just a solicitor's office that smelled faintly of printer ink and polished wood, and a set of keys placed neatly on the table in front of me at 1612. Different keys. Different door. Different life. I signed the final document with steady hands. The settlement had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The house was sold. Equity divided precisely according to contribution records, adjusted, of course, for the attempted refinance complication and unlawful exclusion. My solicitor had been meticulous. Daniel didn't contest it. He couldn't. Documentation has weight. He sent one final email the night before completion. I keep thinking about the porch light. I thought changing the locks would force a conversation. I didn't realize it would end everything. I read it once, then archived it. Because endings don't usually arrive with explosions. They arrive with small decisions made too late. After the internal review, Daniel wasn't dismissed. That would have been dramatic. Instead, his partnership track was reassessed. Slowed. Quietly. In corporate spaces, trust erodes gradually. He had misjudged risk in his own life. That fact lingered. Lena disappeared from his social media within weeks. I never asked why. I never needed to. Reputation recalibrates quickly when confidence fractures. As for me, I moved into a townhouse overlooking a small park. Nothing extravagant. Just light, space, and silence that belonged entirely to me. The first evening there, I stood by the window watching children kick a football across frost-touched grass. No neighbors peering through curtains. No hallway mirrors reflecting strangers. Just stillness. People assume revenge is loud. It isn't. It's controlled. It's refusing to react in the way someone expects. Daniel expected tears on the porch. Pleading. Public breakdown. He expected absence to weaken me. What he didn't understand was that the 3 months in Manchester hadn't just been about a contract. They had been about perspective. When you spend years shrinking parts of yourself to preserve someone else's comfort, you begin to forget your actual size. Distance reminded me. The night he changed the locks, I felt humiliation first. Of course I did. Rain soaking through fabric. A neighbor watching. A stranger standing in my hallway. But humiliation only holds power if you accept its framing. He thought the lock meant exclusion. I saw it as evidence. He thought the public narrative would favor him. I knew facts outlast rumors. We never had a dramatic final confrontation after that day in the snow. No screaming closure. Just a legal process completed with precision. The last time I saw Daniel in person was at the property transfer appointment. He looked tired but composed. I miscalculated, he said simply. Yes, I replied. He waited, perhaps for something softer. Forgiveness. Reassurance. Shared blame. But clarity doesn't require cruelty. I hope you learn from it, I said. And I meant it. Because insecurity is expensive. It costs relationships. It costs reputation. It costs futures. Weeks later, as I unpacked the final box in my new living room, I found the old brass key from the first house. The one that no longer fit. I turned it in my fingers for a moment before placing it inside a drawer. not as a symbol of loss. As a reminder, preparation is quiet power. Silence is strategy. And when someone underestimates you, you don't need to shout. You let them discover it themselves. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had reacted differently that night in the rain. If I had pounded on the door. If I had cried. If I had begged for entry. Would he have felt stronger? Or just louder? The truth is simple. Locks only control doors. They don't control ownership. They don't control dignity. And they certainly don't control someone who is already prepared for the moment they're told to leave. So let me ask you something. If someone changed the locks on your life, would you try to force the door? Or would you quietly build a better house?